In the name of God, in this session we will keep on the previous session. We want to discuss another concept of Saussure. Another concept is language as a system. According to Saussure, every language can be studied as a relational structure or a system. Saussure focus on the relational structure or a system of language. Crucially, the relations between the different units of a language are considered to have priority over the units themselves. As you remember, in the 19th century, they studied the languages as a separated units. But here, according to Saussure, we should consider language as a relational systems, and we should stress on the relation between this unit, not the unit itself. This means that linguistic units have to be defined in relational terms. The linguistic units have to be defined in relational terms. This is the definition of language as a system, the system of language. The system of language means linguistic units have to be defined in relational terms. They exist because they differ from the other units within a network of units in one and the same language. We say that if one unit exists, it is because that unit is different from the other units within that a network of units. As a rule, structural linguistics studies such relations rather than the unit themselves. Phonemes, for instance, can only be defined relationally, and the same holds for meaning. The development from linguistic analysis of units, as you know, in 19th century atomism, to analysis of the relation which define them shows a remarkable parallel with development in a natural science at the first decade of 20th century, in particular physics. Okay, until here we told you, we defined the language as a system. We told you that Saussure consider language as a system. It means that the linguistic unit have to be defined in relational terms, and the units exist because they differ from the other units and within a network of units in one and the same language. It is the definition of language as a system or system of language, and you should point out this tip that Saussure believed that language is a system. It is against the idea in 19th century which concentrate on the unit of language, and they consider the unit as atomism based on the physics, and they don't believe in relation. Therefore, you should be able to define the system of language and its concept, and you should know that this is that was Saussure which focused on this term. As already pointed out, a core concept of Saussure's CLG, his book, related to the systematic character of language is the value. Another concept which is important for Saussure was value of a linguistic sign. A core concept of Saussure's CLG, his book related to the systematic character of language is the value of a linguistic sign. Each sign, it means that each sign possesses a valuer within the system of language, which is delimited negatively by the existence of the other sign. For Saussure, a language can be defined as a system of values. Yet the term value not only applies to sign but also to significant and signify separately. Another concept which was important for Saussure was value. It means that each sign has its value, which the value of each sign is different from the value of other sign. The value of a signify, for example, is determined by its relation to similar values, which is not to be confused with its relative worth in relation to dissimilar objects. Saussure illustrates this distinction with a telling example drawn from a monetary system. Okay, here we want to explain the value terms based on the monetary system. The value of a coin is determined by the other coins of the system. Okay, the value of a coin is determined by the other coin of a system. But it is words that can be bought with it. One important consequence of this characterization of value and the level of signify is that it differs from the referential meaning of a term. Saussure supplies a number of examples to illustrate this. The French word mouton may have the same referential meaning, signification, as the English word sheep, but it doesn't have the same signify or semantic value because English has the word mutton and sheep, a distinction not available in French. Similarly, a plural in German and Latin can have identical reference as a plural in Sanskrit, yet it definitely doesn't share the same signify as a German and Latin distinguish between singular and plural number only, whereas Sanskrit distinguish between singular, plural, and dual. Okay, here in these two paragraphs we concentrate on the two concepts of Saussure. One of them was system. He believed that we should study the language as a relational system, and another concept was value. It means that each sign in each system has its value, which is different from the value of other sign in that language. And here we told you some details and some example to better understanding of this matter of this subject. Another concept are significant, signifies, and signification. A language is a system of sign. We know that. Saussure considers language as a system of sign. To Saussure, a sign establishes a relation between a concept and a sound. The sign establish or create a relation between a concept and a sound, or a series of sound, an acoustic image. To make the distinction appropriate for linguistics, Saussure substitute the term acoustic image with significant or signifier, and a concept with signify or signified. You should know this concept of Saussure. These are not to be understood as purely mental or purely material entities, but rather as the genuinely linguistic counterparts of an idea and a sound. The relation between significant and signify is logically prior to the idea and sound, which are connected through them. This crucial feature of Saussure's theory of sign is illustrated with a well-known analogy. Signifiant and signify can be compared with the front and back of a sheet of a paper. Okay, here we can understand these two concepts through the analogy with the front and back of a sheet of paper. It is impossible to cut the front without cutting the back, and vice versa. They are interrelated with each other. Nevertheless, for Saussure, signs are real because speakers have consciously or unconsciously mental access to them. Okay, we introduce signification, signifier, signifier, and we define them according to Saussure. And here we gave you some example and comparison with other matters to better understanding of that. European structuralists have laid particular importance on the indispensable rule of meaning in language. Thus, taking Saussure hypothesis concerning the inseparable character of significant and signify to its logical conclusion. Not a single entity of language is considered to be deprived of meaning. Okay, here, Saussure pay attention to the meaning of the sound. Also, for Bloomfield and the post-Bloomfieldians, to language was inconceivable without paying attention to meaning. Okay, Bloomfield and his follower pay attention to the meaning. They nevertheless maintained that the meaning couldn't be described significantly by contemporary linguistic methodology. The American structuralist decision not to analyze and describe meaning for its own sake not only turned out to be the major dividing line between American and European structuralism, but also constitute the hallmark of American linguistic research for decades to come. Note that meaning was also completely left out of Chomsky's early linguistic model. When semantics finally came to play a role in generative grammar, the term meaning was used in a sense entirely at odds with the Saussurian doctrine, not as a constitutive element of language, but as a second-order element hinging upon syntax. Okay, here we can see that like Bloomfield and the post-Bloomfieldian, Saussure pay attention to the meaning. And other concept of Saussure was the arbitrariness and motivation. Another essential feature of Saussurean theory of language is the nature of the linguistic sign, which is claimed to be radically arbitrary. Although this view has a long-standing history in European thought, in Saussure's theory of language it takes on a new dimension and has a range of profound consequences. From the CLG, it becomes clear that the arbitrariness of the linguistic sign should be understood in at least 4 different ways. Okay, here we have another concept of Saussure, arbitrariness and motivation. We know that the signs are created in convention. And the relation between the signs and the nature of signs are arbitrary. Here we told you that from the CLG it becomes clear that the arbitrariness of linguistic signs should be understood in at least 4 different ways. Okay, we can get this arbitrariness nature of the sign through these 4 different ways. First of all, the relation between the acoustic form and the object or concept referred to is arbitrary. The relation between the acoustic form and their object or concept which they refer to are arbitrary. Saussure illustrates this by pointing out that the sequences of sound, sur, is not related in any way to the meaning sister. It is arbitrary. For the first time, we create these sounds and we say that this sound means sister. Therefore, it is a convention which we create it. Any other sound can refer to sister. But in convention, we said that this sound, sur, can refer to the word sister in the French. Second, the relation between a linguistic sign, significant and signify together, and the object concept referred to is arbitrary because language is not a nomenclature. It is mistaken, albeit not uncommon opinion, to conceive of a language as a stockpile of words referring to a set of objects or already established mental concept. Okay, we told you that language is not a nomenclature. Uh, According to Saussure, the signified or linguistic meaning proper precedes referential meaning and not the other way around. Third, the relation between significant and signifies is emotive. That is, there is neither a causal relation nor a natural resemblance between them. Rather, the relation is purely conventional in the sense that it is a product of a historical tradition within a linguistic community. It should be noted that Saussure discusses two exceptions of this kind of arbitrariness. Okay, here we introduce four ways to understand that the sign has a conventional nature. But here we have another exception, two exceptions for the Saussure discussion. That he believed that the nature of this concept are arbitrary, the nature of these signs are arbitrary. Here we have two exceptions for this arbitrariness of the sign. The first one is only seemingly an exception. Onomatopoeia show a relation between significant and signified, which is partly motivated by the sound they imitate. Okay, onomatopoeia means those sounds which denote their meaning. According to the sounds, we can get their meaning. However, because their significant are only approximation of real sound, generally present considerable differences in various languages and are subject to historical change, they don't really contradict the arbitrariness claim. The same holds for exclamation. The other exception to the general rule seems more interesting. Unlike a word such as wang, a compound word such as dinof is only relative meant arbitrary. The word being motivated by the part of which it is composed. Dinof, D means 10 and nof means 9. First, finally, the way sounds and ideas are portioned out and mutually delimited by significant and signified is itself arbitrary. According to Saussure, every historical language is based on a particular selection of entities of sound and meaning. And before language makes its appearance, the realm of sound and ideas are just amorphous continua. Okay, here we told you that Saussure believed that the nature of each sound is arbitrary, and we introduced four ways to understanding this arbitrariness of the sound, and we had two exceptions for the arbitrariness of language. You should, there isn't any need to know all of these details. You should just pay attention to the Saussure's idea about the language and its unit. Syntagmatic and associative relation. Another dichotomy and concept which Saussure pay attention to them are syntagmatic and associative relation. Saussure distinguishes between two different classes of relations in language. Saussure distinguishes between two different classes of relation in language: syntagmatic and associative relation. Syntagmatic relations are possible combination of linguistic units on the linear axis of speech production. Okay, sometimes I want you to define the syntagmatic relation by syntagmatic relation. At first, you should pay attention to this point that Saussure distinguishes between two classes of relation in language: syntagmatic and associative relation. Syntagmatic relation means the possible combination of linguistic units on a linear axis of speech production. They hold between signs that are actually present in a speech chain. Okay, here the relation, for example, which exists between these words, the relation between they hold between signs that are actually present in a speech chain. The relation between these words, which they arrange aside each other, is linear. They are in linear axis, and the relation between them is syntagmatic. By syntagmatic means that the relation which exists between these words, which they are placed in linear axis. In French, for instance, contre tout, it means against all, instantiated a syntagmatic relation between the two consecutive units. In a syntagmatic or phrase, a term stands in a relation to everything that follows or precedes it. Associative relation. Associative relation, on the other hand, a relation holding between a sign and other sign not involved in the discourse, which are associated in memory, according to Saussure. Okay, dear student, I want to give you some example about the syntagmatic and associative. Okay. Please pay attention to this word. Okay, dear student, I want to explain the syntagmatic and associative relation. Pay attention to this number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, now these 5 numbers are enough. I want to explain syntagmatic and associative relation based on this number. Pay attention to this number, dear student. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The relation, they are placed in a linear axis. By linear axis, we mean this. Linear axis. It is a linear axis. All of the words in language are in linear axis. This is a linear axis, okay? This number which are aside each other, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they are in syntagmatic axis. It means that they are here the relation between 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 is syntagmatic, because based on the syntagmatic relation, we have here we define it. Okay, in syntagmatic relation, we have the combination of linguistic units. Here, for example, I give the examples through the numbers. On the linear axis, by linear axis we mean this. It is a linear axis. Okay, the combination of linguistic unit in the linear axis, like here. Or I like you. Here we have the syntagmatic relation between these words. Here the syntagmatic relation exists between I and like and you. We have the linear axis. But what we mean by associative relation? Associative relation. In associative relation, we told you that is the relation holding between a sign and other sign not involved in the discourse. Sign, it is the definition of associative relation. You should know that there is a relation between the sign and the other sign not involved in the discourse, and which are associated in memory, according to Saussure. Okay, I want to explain it through this sentence. We told you that here we have the syntagmatic relation between the word of this sentence. Here we have the syntagmatic relation because we have a combination of some words in the linear axis. Okay, but what we mean by associative relation? We told you that in the associative relation, the relation holding between the sign and the other sign not involved in the discourse, not involve. Pay attention to this point, that not involve. Like here, it means that the relation between I, dear student, instead of I can use we, they, he, she, and others. Okay, here the relation which here instead of I, pay attention to this point. I want to explain the associative relation. Here we have I. Instead of I, we can have we, they, he, she, and other nouns. For example, Ali. For example, Zahra. Other proper noun and okay. We can use all of this instead of I. Okay. Therefore, the relation which exists between this I and this proper noun and other words like we, they, he, she, the relation which exists between them, which are in our mind, they are in our mind. Okay, and this exists here in this discourse. The relation between this I, which exists in this discourse, and this word which are in our mind is associative. I can use all of these instead of I. Therefore, in associative, we say that the relation between a sign and other sign, a sign and other sign, which are not exist here in this discourse, it is an associative relation. Instead of you, we can use other pronoun. We can use he, she, and others. Okay, the relation between you and these are syntagmatic, are associative. So sorry. And instead of like, I can use hate. Okay, and other verbs. The relation between like and other verbs is associative. I hope that it will be clear for you. Okay, but in associative, in syntagmatic, as I explained for you and as I define it for you, in the syntagmatic, there is a relation between the possible combination of linguistic units and the linear axis of speech production. But in associative relation, on the other hand, the relation holding between a sign and the other sign not involved in the discourse, and which are associated in memory according to Saussure, as I gave you example. They can be based on a common sign in segment calls to mind a series of other words, including insane or insaneness, which I gave you this example. Instead of this example, or on a common signify, this word and significant. Saussure introduced these two relations to replace the traditional distinction between phonetic morphology, syntax, lexicon with two mutually irreducible relations that better correspond to the object of linguistic envisage. Okay, Saussure considered these two types of relations, syntagmatic and associative, in phonetic morphology, syntax, lexicon, with two mutually irreducible relations that better corresponding to the object of linguistic envisage. In modern linguistics, the distinction is better known as a syntagmatic or paradigmatic dichotomy. The term paradigmatic, going back to okay, here it is important that I want to repeat it again. In modern linguistics, the distinction is better known as a syntagmatic and paradigmatic dichotomy. Instead of associative, we use paradigmatic. Dear student, paradigmatic relation and syntax and associative are the same. Paradigmatic means associative. When I told you paradigmatic, I mean associative. They are the same. And now in modern linguistics, we use paradigmatic instead of associative. Therefore, we have syntagmatic and paradigmatic dichotomy. The term paradigmatic, going back to Yilmazov, who proposed this substitution of associative in order to avoid the undesirable psychological connotation of that word. However, strictly speaking, paradigmatic relation hold between signifies only, not between distributional classes, because not all words that can be selected in a slot on a syntagmatic axis are paradigmatically related. Another concept are internal and external linguistics. Internal and external linguistics. A somewhat neglected Saussurean distinction, which is however of particular importance for understanding some crucial differences between the Prague and Copenhagen schools, is the difference between the internal and external linguistics. Okay, other concept which is important is internal and external linguistics. These terms refer to different approaches that have their own methodologies. These terms refer to different approaches that have their own methodologies. External linguistics is concerned with, it is a French, I gave its English counterpart. Okay, external linguistics is considered with, it collects details about a language without taking into account its internal system. External linguistics, that is, it collects details about a language without taking into account its internal system. It is the meaning of external linguistics. In external linguistics, we pay attention to details of language without taking into account its internal system. But what we mean by internal linguistics, on the other hand, is concerned with the study of system proper lang and only with the system. Here in internal, we just pay attention to the system of language, only the system, not the external characteristics of language. Both internal and external linguistics are important to Saussure. It would be correct to think that he ultimately attempted to reduce linguistics to a purely internally defined science. Although it is true that Saussure, in contrast to most of his contemporaries, emphasized that every historical language has its own autonomous system. Okay, dear student, I told you about another concept of Saussure. Another schools which are structuralist cycles and movement. I want to explain this, repeat this matter again. I think it is enough until the structuralist circle and movement. I want to give you the important part, the important matter of this session. I think for this session it is enough to the structuralist circles and movement. Okay, I want to review the matter again. In this session, here I just want to review the important matter. In this session, we explain about, we concentrate on other concepts of Saussure. Language, Saussure considers language as a system. According to the Saussure, we told you that that Saussure considers language as a system. Okay, when I want you to summarize this session, you should be able to pay attention to just the important matter, and it is not necessary to pay attention to the non-important matters and more details. For example, I don't want you to pay attention to the examples in your summarization. Here I told you that sorcerer pay attention to the language as a system, consider language as system. But what we mean by this? Sorcerer pay attention to the relational structure of system. The relation between the different units of language are considered have a priority of the unit themselves. It means that here we have the definition of system. What we mean by a language as a system? It means that linguistic units have to be defined in relational terms. In relational terms. Because they exist, because they differ from other units within a network of units in one and the same language. It is the meaning of systems. And we told you that in the 19th century they studied the units of language because they were affected by physics, and they considered the language unit as atom, and they just read that units. And another matter which Saussure pay attention to that was value, which each sign has its value, which is different from other sign value. For example, we give you example in a monetary system. The value of each queen is different from the value of other queens because they are in relational systems. And other details. About the significance, signify, and signification, they were another concept which Saussure pay attention to them. We told you that Saussure considered language as a system of sign, which to Saussure a sign established a relation between the concept and the sound. And to make a distinction appropriate for linguistics, Saussure substitute the term acoustic image with significant or signifier, and concept with signify or signified. Signify or signified are the same, and signifier and significant are the same too. Sometimes we consider sound as a significant or signifier, and its meaning as a signified or signified. You should know these terms. And another matter was the difference between the American and European structuralists about the this concept. And we told you that Saussure, like the Bloomfield and post-Bloomfieldian, pay attention to the meaning. And we gave you example that meaning is like the front, and meaning and the sound are like the front and back of the page, which we can separate them from each other. Another concept of Saussure was arbitrariness and motivation. We told you that based on Saussure, the relation between the sound and its meaning is arbitrary, and the sign has the arbitrary nature. But here we introduce for different way to understand this arbitrary nature of language, and we told you about the onomatopoeia, those sounds which their sounds denote their meaning. We told you that here we don't have arbitrariness between these sounds. And about another words, we have the exception, which their sounds motivate their meaning. Another matter and another concept which Saussure pay attention to them were syntagmatic and associative relation. In syntagmatic was the relation between the possible combination of linguistic unit and the linear axis of speech production. By linear, all of the linguistic units are in linear axis, like here. They are in linear axis. And in syntagmatic, we pay attention to the relation which exists between the combination of these linguistic units in the linear axis of speech production. And in syntagmatic or in paradigmatic or associative relation, we told you that we use the paradigmatic in the modern linguistic instead of associative. We pay attention to the relation holding between the sign and other sign not involved in the discourse, and which are associated in a memory according to Saussure, which I gave you this example that here the relation which exists between these words in the sentence is syntagmatic, because in syntagmatic we believe that we have the relation between the combination of words in the linear axis, but in paradigmatic or associative we say that we have the relation between that sign and the other sign which not exists in this discourse. For example, the relation between like and hate and other verb can come here instead of like, and the relation between I and other pronoun or proper noun which can come in this in the position of subject, or the relation which exists between you and other pronoun which can come instead of you is the paradigmatic, is the associative or paradigmatic relation, which we told you that these words are exist in our memory, and we know that they are different from the other words which come here. Okay, another concept which Saussure pay attention to them were internal and external linguistic. As we told you that the difference which exists between the Prague and Copenhagen schools is because of this internal and external nature of linguistics units. We define the internal and external linguistics and external linguistics which collect the details about the language without taking into account its internal system. In the external linguistics, as its name denotes, here we don't have pay attention to the internal system of language. We just care the external features of language. We just collect the details about language without taking into account its internal system. Which is in contrast with the internal linguistics, which is internal linguistics. We just pay attention to the system of language. We are concerned with the internal feature of linguistic units, and we don't care the external characteristics of language. Therefore, they are different from each other, and the Prague and Copenhagen schools are different from each other because they pay attention to one of these concepts. You should know that we have the external and internal linguistic, which in internal we are concerned with the system of language, we are concerned with the internal characteristics of language, but in external linguistics we don't care the internal feature of linguistics. Dear students, as I told you, you can summarize this session in one page, not more, because I don't want the details about this concept. In this session we told you about the system of language. You should, in your summarization, you should define the system of language, and for example, we told you about the arbitrariness and motivation. You should define these two concepts. As a whole, I want you just the important matters of this concept there. You should mention all of these concepts which we explained for you in this session, and then you should give the explanation, and you should describe this concept. And maybe you be able to summarize this session in one page or two. The volume of the pages is not important for me. It is important just to mention all of the important matter of this session. But dear student, for your final exam, you should pay attention to details. You know that, and you are familiar with the final exam, in which in final exam you should refer to details of this matter, but for your summarization it is not important. I want you to ask me your questions through the WhatsApp group, please, and please do your homework in the determined time. Thank you. Please ask me your questions through the WhatsApp group. I will explain them for you by more example. Thank you. In the name of God.